So welcome everybody. Welcome to Enablement Uncanned. This is actually our first episode, so super excited about this one. And I want to introduce our superstar guest we've got with us today, Arup Chakravarti. Pleased to see you again, Arup. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Jack.
Great, good to hear. So Arup is an MD and go-to-market consultant at Lato Sensu. And I've been with Arup. I mean, I've worked with Arup now for, God, it's been a long old time, Arup. How long have you known me? 3 years, 4 years, maybe longer?
Getting on for that, which is pretty decent, right? In today's world, fast moving relationships, that's quite a long time. A quick background from me. I have been in sales enablement, sales operations, marketing operations, and even data and analytics for the entirety of my career. So I've never done B2C. I've always been in B2B. I've always kind of navigated through those different types of roles. And again, if you span back near enough 20 years ago, there wasn't a sales operations function. We called it business performance, right? And kind of that basically had all of the kind of the functional governance and ownership over things like quota setting and quota management, as well as quota policy and incentive plan setting. And then, then I started to see a transition from massive Excel spreadsheets over to CRM systems, etc. So what was essentially business performance became sales ops. And actually, I got an opportunity through my career to be able to transition into marketing operations, and then more recently into sales enablement as well. So I've really loved all of those key pieces. I guess ultimately the way that I describe it is those operational components of how you make your sales teams more productive in field, right? Whether that's in person, whether that's virtually, whether that's on the phone, whatever the case may be, ultimately it's about being able to help people become more productive. I'd say I looked my early part of my career was more in the ops part, the sales ops, marketing ops part, which I sort of see as the hardwiring of how do you get people productive, and like more recently sales enablement, which I sort of see as the soft wiring or the software piece of how do you get people more productive. So I've been really fortunate enough to cover a range of capabilities and a range of skills, and I think it's increasingly a really interesting place to work, and it's the fundamentals of how we help B2B sellers be more successful in their roles.
That's a great way to put it. And it's super interesting, right? It's, I mean, I've been in sales now for, as you know, for longer than I can imagine, 15 years or so. And yeah, typically this has been the most exciting sort of 3 or 4 years of being in the enablement world, meeting people like yourselves and sort of having these discussions, because it really is there's so many different elements to it, so many different arms to enablement, as you know. Well, what do you think is sort of the biggest misconception about trust in B2B sales? And what I'm asking you here, Arup, is sales processes, the med picks, the challenges, a complete waste of time?
And we discussed this, just to maybe give your listeners a little context. So we discussed this, right? And I know you invited me on to talk about being a trusted advisor and becoming a trusted advisor. So we spent some time kind of going, and actually appreciate the opportunity to bounce around some of these ideas with you. So I kind of recently started my own consultancy, which is Lato Sensu Limited, and very keen to be able to help enterprise sellers become trusted advisors. And the reason that I want to be able to do that is because increasingly in kind of an environment which is accelerating with the pace of technology through generative AI, but also lengthening out deal cycles with more and more kind of decision makers getting involved in the decisioning process, it's becoming, I think, fundamentally important to be able to build trusted relationships as a B2B seller, and then kind of ultimately, if you want to get to that place, the outcomes that you want to get to, it's going to be through trust, and it's going to be an acceleration of deal decisions, even a shortening of the sales cycle time. All of those things are going to ultimately come down to how trusted are you as a seller, how trusted are you by the buying organization. So I get it. I get, this whole piece is, are you trying to, Arup, are you trying to overtake or supersede, or you trying to, sort of suggest that this framework, trusted advisor framework, outshines or overshadows some of the methodologies. That's not the case at all. I'd love to be a bit more controversial, Jack, and maybe one day I'll be more confident enough to go, stop wasting your time with MedPick, etc. Come to me and talk to me. But
that's what I was hoping you were going to
yeah,
start with.
I know you want to start with that, something a bit spicy, right? But
yeah,
I've got to work on that, Jack. I'll take the feedback there. Maybe I do need to work on a slightly more spicy
next
kind of
time.
intro next
Next
time.
time.
But what I will say is that whenever I talk to top performing salespeople, consistently I hear and I ask, what methodology are you fond of, or what methodology have you particularly used through your career? Consistently, I hear, actually, there's no one methodology that they've used. They're always open. And that's kind of the growth mindset, the learning mindset. They're always open to learning, and sometimes even relearning methodologies when they join a new firm or a new organization. They get reintroduced to a methodology that they've perhaps experienced in the past. But they're always looking to take a few insights or a few kind of practices from what they're learning and then pull that out and just incorporate that into the way that they work. And it's a constant build of, this is how I work. Let me incorporate a few additional learnings. And it's this constant kind of growth in that respect, which is great. So I was not trying to take away from deal methodologies, qualification methodologies, negotiation methodologies. I think they're all very, very powerful and have a really strong place in corporate life. I do think, and I'm sure lots of the audience will agree, that if you just do a kind of a one-time, sheep dip learning type experience, then the reinforcement and the stickiness of that education doesn't necessarily stay. But that's a separate issue. So I don't think that those lack value. I think it's more a case of being able to, with a trusted advisor framework, look at more of the behaviors, specifically the behaviors. And this is not a kind of Arup thinks these behaviors are. I've actually spent some time studying a number of academics that have based their research on psychology and economics and marketing. And there is a kind of a correlation between specific types of behaviors that an individual seller can exhibit and how that helps generate trust with their buying community. So not to supersede or to take away from the other methodologies, but hopefully to try to find a kind of a behavioral framework that sits on top of it.
That's super interesting about the research, because I haven't done the research, which is why I'm inviting you on to talk about it, right? But from my experience, particularly in the sales side and being on the front line and actually having these conversations with people like yourself on a daily basis, I typically know early in a deal cycle whether or not that deal is going to get close to being an account based on the kind of relationship I have with the individual, right? With the champion. I'm using the old MedPick. We've been talking about it. I say champion a lot. Challenger is one of my favorites, actually. So champion, and again, taking parts from different pieces, right? Which is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
So I know early in the sales cycle, I should say, that if a deal is likely to become a good account based on that relationship and trust that I'm trying to build. So, and you mentioned AI, right? Well, AI is definitely going to be on the list of podcasts coming up for sure. But you can't build trust through AI, can you? Or at least it's not something generative AI can actually enhance and assist in those enablement strategies for sure, and engagement strategies, but it's all about human to human, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, totally. So let's make it a bit material, and I think generative AI has a really powerful place to play, or a role to play in this. So I am not, in fact, quite the reverse. I think if you're not utilizing generative AI to help you in terms of your understanding of specific accounts and specific stakeholders at those accounts, then you're missing a trick, because you need to have that depth of understanding to then be able to go in and more fluidly, as a human in a human to human interaction, more fluidly, with the background knowledge that you've done your homework on, generative AI assisted, you then have the opportunity to take that learning and just be that much more engaging and compelling and powerful when you're trying to build that trusted relationship, right? So yeah, let me just give you a quick example. So, and we'll talk about a couple of frameworks, but one is the sort of 5 cognitive processes or 5 mental processes. And that comes down to capability, predictability, intentionality, calculative, and transference, right? Capability, the top of those 5. And whilst there's no, the academics that I've read on this and the research I've read on this doesn't necessarily prioritize any of those five, but I sort of see, I've seen in other papers and other pieces of work, a level of prioritization. So I've put capability at the top. And
Hmm.
this I've seen through a number of other research papers as well, that this idea of expertise, of bringing your expertise to the table, helps drive or starts to initiate that sense of trust and helps to drive that more. So capability is a combination of your experience and your expertise, right? And how do you get to that place, particularly in the context of an industry or a client or a set of stakeholders within that client? Well, you've got to do your, there's no getting away from it. You've got to do your account research, right?
Sure do.
And increasingly, there are more and more tools that can help you with that. Whether it's built into an enablement platform or whether it's capabilities that you can sort of integrate into your sales stack, or whether you're just spending a little bit of extra time and kind of doing the due diligence of getting into a generative AI capability like ChatGPT or Gemini or Bard or whatever. You could utilize any of those capabilities to help you. Obviously, to help you boost out your knowledge, your learning, and kind of bring that to the table when you're engaging with a client.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely been a key topic in the last 6 months per se, with what I'm doing, right, with the AI stuff. And I utilize it a lot more than I thought I would have done. And is it helping me build trust? I mean, naturally, I like to think that I'm fairly good at building trust from a human to human perspective for sure. But I do use a lot of AI with, like you said, building proposals out, getting documents to customers on time,
Yeah, yeah.
helping me speed the process up and building, and that does encompass building that level of trust with that customer. So it's finding the balance, definitely finding the balance between the two.
Yeah, and so you can't take away the human skills, the human to human skills that you need to have.
Mm,
So, in any of the engagements that you have, whether it's a fresh engagement or it's a long-standing customer, and you're going back in and kind of having a sort of an annual or biannual business review, etc., or even if it's just the informal conversations that you have with your kind of your ongoing champion at an account, um, any of those interactions are still going to be the inherent trust and the trustworthiness of yourself as a seller is going to be built on some arguably basic skills, like are you good at listening, are you good at
mm,
communicating, how
mm,
empathetic are you, right? Are you listening before trying to, are you listening to genuinely listen, or are you listening just to kind of just wait to the end of that and throw your perspective in and kind of bring it back to some kind of a product-based picture? So regardless of whether you spend the time in generative AI doing the research or not, you've still got to have some of those kind of core basic human to human principled behaviors to help build the trust. But when you do have the opportunity to talk in an educated, intelligent manner about what you as a seller bring to the table, and how what you bring to the table can support the client, then either you're building that knowledge set up through your own research, or you're utilizing generative AI to help you kind of get
mm.
a little bit of a kind of a clip on that. So
You and I have spoken about that before, how important it is. And it could be something as small as when you're on a conversation or you're having a discovery call or a demo with somebody and you say, I will get this to you by the end of the week, right? And it could be something as small as sending them a case study, or something
yeah,
as small as sending a proposal, or whatever it might be, just a little one liner. If you don't send that by the end of the week, you lose that trust in my eyes. And that is a human element right there. There's no AI that's going to help you do that. That is simply a human instinct, right?
yeah,
So for me, and I know you and I have spoken about this when we were talking about the framework that you're kind of building, is as long as if you send something on time and you deliver, that is the one component for me that starts to build that level of trust. Um, and then I
because
guess this kind of leads into, what impact does we know sort of the impact methodologies have, or at least the research says that they have. What impact of trust, or I guess the lack of trust, do you think has on the decision making process and then repeat business?
Massive. So
Mm,
I'll come to that really quickly, actually. Just very interestingly. So the second of those five that I called out was predictability. So you've got
mm,
capability, predictability, intentionality, right? And fundamental to predictability is just absolutely adhering to the commitment that you've made. Follow up
right.
is absolutely, absolutely crucial. And honestly, Jack, I've been in so many interactions with B2B sellers where they've promised to do something after the call and it hasn't happened. And sometimes I've chased because I kind of want to progress, and I'm also, and I'm kind of engaged in wanting to bring that solution, deal, capability, whatever it may be, into the organization. So sometimes I've chased because I want to make progress on it. But equally, sometimes I've gotten to a point where I'm kind of a bit like, well, if you're not gonna genuinely follow up, you made a few comments during the course of the call. I jot some of these down. If you're not going to follow up on these and just shoot me an email afterwards to go, this is what we talked about, this is the minutes, these are the action items, then what's the point in me chasing you down? And I experienced that a
Mm,
lot from B2B sellers, right? So this whole notion of predictability is you say XYZ through the course of a call. You get to the end of that call, you make some commitments in terms of when you're going to send through the minutes and action items, and then commitments around one or two low-hanging fruit action items. Great, that's it. Make that commitment on the call, send that email, and then progress the action items as they need to progress, because the whole notion of kind of predictability as a trust building process is, if you say X and you do X, then me as a buyer, in my brain, my brain is going to subconsciously calculate, I can trust this person.
yeah.
They basically said X and they did X, right? And if they're not able to do X, they've come back to me in a timely manner and said, can't quite do X at this point in time, but look, why don't we look at Y or Z or etc. Or we can get to X, but it's going to take a little bit longer, right? It's literally that. Kind of sounds basic, but it is literally that
It
simple.
does.
And the science proves again and again that if you do that, what it's doing for me as a buyer is I'm doing this calculation in my head, which is, can I trust this seller?
Mm,
And they are doing what they've said. So based on past performance, actually, I can trust this individual. And and
mm-hmm.
and then this individual has got a greater that salesperson has got a greater scope to ask for other things or move the conversation in a different direction, because what they've proven to me through past behavior is they've said X and they did X.
Yeah. So it kind of gives them the ticket to then be able to say those more challenging things, and
Totally,
sort of push you down a particular way.
totally.
And you're right. I mean, I've definitely been in the situation before where I've promised something, come off the call and realize I can't do it in time. Right? It happens. But what I will always make sure I do is follow up with that individual and just say, hey, we spoke about this. I said that I would get this done. However, would you mind if we push this out? Because it's just being honest, right? We're all human, and it's important to be able to do that. But if you don't do that, and it does sound simple, right? It sounds simple. But if you don't do it, you aren't going to build that trust. I mean, and obviously we've spoken about that. So with with salespeople globally, we know there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word average, Arup, because that's not what I'm trying to do here, but it's the 80-20 principle, right? There are a lot of performers that aren't hitting their number. That does happen,
Right,
more often than people hitting their number, right? So
right.
how can we, if we can, intentionally build trust? I mean, is there a way to teach it? I guess is there any strategies? And going back to the frameworks that you were talking about, is there any strategies that you have in mind or that you're looking to build for becoming a trusted advisor? Can we actually teach that, or is there kind of is it you're just kind of born with it and that's that?
Um,
It's a really tough question.
yeah, it is a tough question, right? And I get that, and I'm kind of in the development process here as well. So I get
Mm,
that an outcome of this needs to be able to showcase that it helps salespeople get to their number, right? Because that's
mm-hmm,
that's that's fundamentally what's important. Um, I think part of the challenge, as always, is kind of a framework that takes a slightly longer term view, when oftentimes we've got the pressure. This is true for all organizations, and I'm not downplaying this or boohooing it or anything like that. The truth is, we've all got the quarterly and annual pressure.
Hmm.
And sometimes we've got weekly pressures, right? Sometimes we've got daily pressures in terms of daily metrics that we're supposed to hit, if not weekly metrics if you're in a particular type of function. But there will definitely be a quarterly metric to hit, and always an annual metric to hit. So does a framework like becoming a trusted advisor, does that help you get to that quarterly outcome or to that annual outcome? Yes, I think once you're kind of in a rolling cadence, you then start to build up your your skill set and your kind of your momentum towards getting to those outcomes. I don't have any specific proof points as yet to be able to kind of go, I worked with
No.
XYZ and they got to ABC outcome, right? So I am working towards developing that. But yes, I think it can be taught. So, so the second framework that I've got is kind of the 10 antecedent here being like the drivers, the 10 drivers of trust. It's quite a long list. But again, looking at the research and looking at the studies, I boiled it down to the top 10. And in fact, we can,
Hmm.
for the sake of time, just talk about the top five. And this came through across a lot of academic research, particularly where the kind of the research had focused on some of these levers or drivers of trust, and they'd found them to have a correlation between, more often than not, between an individual doing something or doing that thing, and then ultimately developing a level of trust with the buying organization. So top of the list actually is expertise, interestingly, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not even things like shared values or likability or building rapport or anything like that. Top of the list is expertise.
Interesting.
As a seller, if you want to build trust, particularly, actually, I go through the list of 10, you'll find that the vast majority of the list of 10 are personal behaviors or personal attributes. There's one or two in there that are organizational attributes, and it'll make sense
Interesting.
when you see it, right? So expertise is top of the list. Then there's reputation, which could be both personal or organizational.
Bit of both. Yeah.
Frequency of interaction, both social and business context. Similarity, which is not, Jack, you're the same as me, but actually similarity is, do we have at least a shared sense of values, a shared sense of values, right? Number five, which is pretty much out of the control of an individual seller, is firm size, which basically talks about the size of the firm, the brand
Mm-hmm.
awareness of the firm, etc. And you know yourself, if you're working for a Microsoft, it's probably a lot easier to sell than, you know.
Yeah, because you got a bigger name,
So
right? Yeah.
completely. Number six is likability. Number seven is integrity. Number eight is experience, kind of also sort of attaches to expertise. Number nine is communication. And number 10, again, which is broadly a company level attribute, is willingness to customize. So all of those, you add them all up. What are the ones that so let's look at the top five. What are the ones that a individual can focus on? So top five would be expertise, reputation, frequency of interaction, similarity, and then you switch out firm size, likability. So those would be the top five, right? Now that doesn't mean that you can't take a challenger-based approach, right? It
Mm.
does, because actually that challenger-based approach for me is number one, is expertise. Do you have enough expertise in the industry, in the vertical, in that space, in the product space as well, and have the authority to be able to challenge your client or your prospects approach to how they're solving for a particular business problem. So I don't see, when you look at that list of five, because they've got words like kind of similarity and likability in there, that sort of suggests your kind of your account management type role in the sort of the four roles that you've got in Challenger. I don't see it that way at all. I see it as being behaviors and behavior buckets that you can work on, that you can highlight, and that ultimately, where there's a match, you can kind of emphasize that match. Frequency of interaction also triggers intentionality, and the kind of the intentionality mental process is essentially, what is Jack's intention here? Like
Mm.
as a buyer, I'd be thinking, what is Jack's intention? Is Jack's intention, and all of this happens, so much of this happens subconsciously. Is Jack's intention to help, and to help me and my business grow? Or actually, have I got to have a degree of, is there an element of risk there? Now, do I have to kind of hold Jack at arm's length, etc.? So frequency of interaction even helps get through that, because you're investing your time in the relationship. And if you're doing the basics, which is active listening, etc., clear, concise communication, not over promising, keeping to your commitments as you make them, then that frequency of interaction makes me go, actually Jack's investing his time, and I do this subconsciously. Jack's investing his time in here, and he's genuinely interested in our business and how to help
Mm.
the business grow and go in the right direction. That starts to make me immediately go, well, okay, yeah, yeah, there is a trusted relationship that should be explored here, or that should be building here.
That's super interesting. So where in your history with vendors, because I'm sure you've spoken to your fair share of vendors, have you spoken to an individual that have you ever been, you're talking about holding them at arm's length, which is absolutely fine. But have you ever thought to yourself, I should trust this guy, but I can't? Has that ever happened? Because they're kind of maybe being overzealous. Maybe they're messaging you too much. Maybe they do have the expertise, but you're kind of not necessarily sure about their actions, whether it is just to try and get you on board and get the money, get the commission check, right?
Right.
Or would you then only say, okay, I'm more interested in speaking to somebody that doesn't show those value, because look, every salesperson wants to get a commission check, right? We know that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, I know for certain, and I'm not just saying this, I do have value and I do find value in enhancing, people like yourselves or companies like yourselves processes. It's not necessarily just the end goal of getting the paycheck at the end of it. And I
Right.
think a lot of that comes down to the belief in the product and sort of your position in a company. But have you ever had an experience where maybe it's been negative? I mean, that's what this podcast is all about, right? What kind of maybe a positive and a negative one?
Yeah. So look, I think the interactions that we've had, I think, have been really positive. And I'm not just saying that for the sake of saying it, right? And I'll give you a particularly material example on this. And this was when, I think the gentleman's name is Ishmael, joined as the sort of the VP of kind of solution engineering or sales engineering, right? And we were talking about a challenge that we had, which is a lack of conversation intelligence capability, right? And again, as I've mapped this through, looking at it after the event, yes, Bigtincan were very willing to show that willingness to customize, right? Remember I called out that the 10 items there, and the last one on the list was willingness to customize. And
Mm-hmm.
actually what we did was we had a sort of joint exploration around actually some of the capabilities of the tools that you've got, could they be utilized? Could we potentially leverage them in such a way as to be able to do a degree of conversation intelligence? And actually that was really valuable, right? And again, as we talked through that, there were on numerous occasions that you managed my expectations to say, look, Arup, you're not going to necessarily get what if you've got in your mind a sort of a delivery kit that you would get from all of the big name conversation intelligence vendors, you're not necessarily going to get that with us, because we're kind of in the process of developing this out, building this out. Hopefully you've got all of that in place now. But I appreciated the honesty behind that at the time. And I appreciated, again, that willingness to customize and to find slight, I don't know, is there a hack that we could go
Mm-hmm.
down here to be able to help, and would that fulfill the sort of need that I'm looking for, etc.? And it's those sorts of experiences that I think are really fundamental towards building trust. Not only building trust with the organization, but I also think building trust with the seller longer term. So I know you've been with Bigtincan for a while. I'm sure you'll remain for a while, but if at any future time you moved on, that trust would always exist. That's
Mm.
become a kind of a currency in its own right, right? So if you ever move, I'm not suggesting that you should at all. If you ever do move on, there is a level of trust, and there's a level of kind of reciprocal kind of faith there as well, right? So, and I think that's kind of the positive experience. The negative for me is exactly the sort of the sort of example that I called on previously. Now, we worked with a type data vendor. Again, I'm not going to name any names, and gotten quite a way down the sales process, almost at point of execution. It just needed senior management level approval. We had a couple of curveballs come in where the US organization were utilizing a sort of a competitor and already had that relationship. And so by its very nature, which is unfortunate, we discovered that late in the sales process. And that meant that we kind of had to go down the route that the US were already using. The vendor that I'd been talking to locally here had a superior product, a superior data set, and a superior service. And they were very confident in that. And I did say, look, I've got to go down this route, but I'm here to help build up. If you want to do a head to head, and we compare your capability against the vendor that we already have a relationship with via the US that I'm going to have to, in the first instance, build that relationship with. If
Yep.
you're prepared over time to do a bit of a head-to-head, then we can get the results, and those results will allow me to at least go back to my management here locally and say, look, I think vendor A, whom we were always talking to, is better than vendor B. That's the route we should go down, even though we've had to go down the route of vendor B, global procurement, all of that, blah, blah, blah. But there's enough, we're all sensible people. Why don't we go down the route of vendor A? Because it will drive better sales productivity, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally what we want to drive. And I thought what was disappointing was that I'd laid out that I felt like I'd laid out as the buyer, I'd laid out, here's how we could progress over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months. I appreciate that's not landing you a paycheck. I appreciate that's not getting you to the quarterly number that you need to get to. But if that's something that you want to progress, then let's do it. Now, maybe in all honesty, maybe the best decision there was to qualify me out and then just drop the deal. Maybe it was,
Yeah.
right? But it kind of also felt a little bit like, I've just offered you a pathway here. You don't have to prioritize this pathway, but you should certainly try to find some mechanism by which you connect with me, remain connected, etc. There was some soft commitment of, oh, actually, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't we connect you to our vendor A? Why don't we connect you to our sales engineer and data ops department, and then we can have a bit of a conversation in terms of how we do that head-to-head analysis. I let it sit there. Nobody came back. Nobody actually dropped me a follow-up note. Nobody said a month, 2 months down the line, listen, where are we with this? Would you like to look at this again, etc.? Like that's that, right? And so have I lost trust in that organization? No, but I mean, I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't say that I had, and I would say that for the seller I was engaging with, there's some opportunity for that individual to kind of tighten up some of their behavior pattern. That's what
He
I
needs to come and speak to you, I think, or by sounds of it. But no, this is the thing, right? Well, I'll come back to the positive experience in a second, but that negative, while it's fresh in the mind, you mentioned there, has it made you lose trust in the organization? No. But if you were to pitch that organization up with somebody else that you did trust, you are going to not negatively, you're always going to have that negative thought in your mind, aren't you, about that organization? And I think, this isn't just an individual based, building trust is important for the individual. Yes, for sure, because it's your personal brand. It's you as an individual getting those reviews and getting that good traction. However, it does reflect badly on the business. And, whether that be me, whether that be somebody else, and other conversational intelligence vendors are out there, vendor agnostic, not just us. So no, I appreciate that. I'll make sure I pay you afterwards, Arup, for that good so thank you for that. But you're right. You said if I move on, right? Even if I'm not in enablement, if I move to a competitor, or if I went into cybersecurity or went somewhere different,
yeah,
there's always going to be an element of a potential relationship between you and I, because I think that's kind of where we are with this, right? And that's how you know that you do have a trusted vendor or a trusted person that you work with, that no matter where they're going into, you'll always be able to have that connection. So yeah, that's super helpful. So everyone needs to be trusted. Everyone has to be trusted. You've got to work on that. So it's quite a good segue into this part then. So to kind of wrap this all up, how do people, or what are the kind of top 3 tips would you give in terms of implementing this? How can you implement trust into an individual? How would somebody go out and do that? Is there sort of 3 quick fire tips, or key trust building strategies that listeners to the podcast can actually begin to implement? Where would you start them with?
I would absolutely say, look, you've got to, if you look at those top 5, which is expertise, reputation, frequency of interaction, similarity, and likability. Whether you agree with them or not is a fair position to have. I'm just literally kind of taking from what I've seen, personal experience, but equally, what I've also seen come through from the academic research. I would absolutely say that, look, you've got to build that expertise, right? So I think this one's an interesting one and a tricky one, because those are the 5 items that an individual has direct control over. So whether you work for a Microsoft, or whether you work for the local, gadget shop around the corner, that has zero brand recognition, these are the 5 things that you can absolutely control. So building that expertise in terms of your product knowledge, your industry knowledge, you're doing your account planning, your account research, I think that's fundamentally important, right? And we all know that that's fundamentally important, but yet we all, myself included, we all just shy away from it, because it's just kind of like, oh God, when do I make the time for this, etc. How do I get around to doing this? And either you do it proactively, which is rare, or you're doing it after you've been reminded for the nth time, which is common, right?
For
So
sure.
yeah, I've been on both sides of that table, yeah, so it's okay. It's okay. That's the reality. It's like focusing on that, building up your expertise is key. Focusing on your reputation, utilizing social media as a mechanism by which you can build up your personal brand. And again, I see a lot of sellers not doing that. In my time in corporate, through a number of years, I've consistently heard, like, why do I want to be doing that stuff on social? Or, well, the marketing team haven't actually published anything yet, so exactly what am I going to repost or republish, etc. The missed trick there is, it's really important to be able to build your reputation, and as an individual, social, particularly LinkedIn, there's been so much debate about, should you be the voice of your company on LinkedIn versus how much of your own autonomous individual voice can you have on LinkedIn. Now it's just accepted. Like 10 years ago, everyone was super careful about how they utilized LinkedIn, and were they amplifying the company voice, or was there a danger that they were kind of like utilizing their own voice? Now it's just accepted that actually you can have with respect to your company
For
brand and
sure.
values, you can have your own voice. So you should have your own voice. If you're not having your own voice there, how are you building up that sense of reputation? How are you building up that sense of, yeah, I'm a buyer, and I'm not necessarily going to make a buying decision based on what I've seen about your company on LinkedIn, but I am going to make a trust-based decision on, do I trust this individual? I am going to be making that decision, even, again, not necessarily consciously in a B2B context, but maybe subconsciously. That is what happens in the background. Frequency of interaction, right? We've just talked a lot about that in terms of how that drives the predictability equation, how that drives the intentionality equation. Similarity, shared values. I mean, that's fundamentally important. And you may even remember when you were helping pull together one of the earlier proposal presentations. You may remember this, you may not. I'd sort of encourage you to talk about maybe even some of the shared values up front. Like
Yes.
maybe even more important than the slide where you've got, we work with all of these customers. And increasingly we sort of see presentations where that slide is pushed in kind of more downstream
Further
in the messaging.
down.
I was kind of like upstream in the messaging, talk about the values, talk about the shared values, because I think that's really important, because it helps build that connection, and it helps build that sense of, yeah, we're building a trusted relationship. We're on that journey, and here are the right component parts to fall into place. Is it rocket science to get to this place? No. Is it something that can be taught, and sort of behavioral practice learned? I'm 100% confident it can. Can I equate results to it? Not just yet. So I think that's a sort of the next part of my journey, is to build this out, have a more kind of robust, I suppose, asset set, right? Learning or education asset set, and then start to kind of try to tailor that into the so what of it.
The so what, the most important thing in enablement, right? And
Yeah,
I've spoken a lot about this, going back to the LinkedIn stuff and having your own personal opinion,
yeah,
having a seat at the table and all that kind of stuff. The so what, how are you going to, okay, how can I paint an ROI into this? That's what everyone wants to know,
yeah,
right? How much is
absolutely.
this trust building framework actually going to, enhance my salespeople? But I think it's obvious that it does. It's just like you said, finding the metrics that can actually prove that, which is going to be a challenge. But I think I'm definitely excited to see it for sure. But yeah, transparency for me and consistency, they're really the two things that I will always try and instill in my conversations and my day to day. I'll be honest with people. If I can't do something, I'll tell them I can't. If I can, then I will. Right.
Yeah.
And if you do that consistently over time, you know, you've kind of ticked off 4 or 5 of those sort of top 6 that you were mentioning in terms of being that trusted advisor. So here's one to finish off with then. Can trust ever be repaired once broken? In a vendor scenario, you know, you're speaking to a vendor, you're speaking to a salesperson, and that salesperson, you've thought, they're just in it for the cash. They don't actually care about what I want or what the business wants. Can that be repaired?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if it is so the example that I brought up previously, right, with a kind of the vendor A, vendor B, etc., the data analytics firm. Um, I, I wouldn't say that the individual, the seller that I was talking to at vendor A had done anything terrible to break the trust. He hadn't. It's not as if he or she had gone out of their way to do something that was malicious or intentionally bad or anything like that. It's just I think they failed to do some basics, and they failed to do some key actions that now have placed this question mark in my mind. Can you come back from that? Can you recover from that? Of course, of course. And you can always go back to a client and you can always say, look, my apologies, I didn't do X, I didn't do Y, or made ABC commitment and didn't follow through on that. Let me start to kind of build a few bridges there and maybe correct a few sort of wrongs, if you like, for want of a better expression. So I think you can absolutely build that. Now, if you've got a salesperson that has kind of burnt a few bridges, that's been a lone wolf, burnt a few bridges, said a few things that were completely untrue, right? And probably more than likely exited the firm. Can the firm build that trust back up? Of course the firm can build that trust back up, right? Because the firm now has the opportunity to say, the selling firm, the vendor has the opportunity to say, look, really apologetic about the somewhat unfortunate experience you had with, this salesperson. They've exited the company. We really value your relationship and we'd like to continue to have that. Totally understand if, you don't want, but, at least leave the door open for us to be able to have these continued conversations. And provided that exists, then there's always an opportunity to be able to have a kind of a trusted relationship build up. Now, from scratch, yes, sometimes trust kind of exists sort of. Trust is an interesting thing because you sort of, you start off arguably in a brand new relationship. Arguably, you already have a tiny little bit of trust in the bank. Most people already go in with a little bit of trust in the bank, right? And then you want to build on that. You want to build on that trust capital. But if you deplete it, you can go into the negative, right? So then you've got that hard job of getting yourself back up to, at least to a zero balance, right? Before you can start to build on it again. So I do think it's kind of important to recognize in brand new relationships, even when you don't have the firm size, the firm brand, the firm kind of brand awareness that a Microsoft would have, even when you don't have that, it's sort of worth recognizing that in most instances, most prospective first time interactions, you will have a tiny bit of trust capital. And then it's a case of building that up. But even if you deplete it, yes, you can always go back and start to right some of those wrongs.
And if all else fails in enablement for you and I, we can get into relationship and marriage counseling by sounds of it.
Yeah.
I've broken my trust with my wife or my husband. Can we now sort that out? Absolutely, you can. Come and speak to Arup and Jack. So, but no, you're right. I think it's.
I don't know if I would lead with expertise on that one. Yeah, I think
I wouldn't either.
Trust in B2B commercial. I don't know if I'd lead with expertise there.
Talk about transferable skills, right? Transferring from one thing completely to your B2C marriage counseling. But no, I would say that I'm happily married, so not that I would want to get into marriage counseling. But no, it's super important that you mentioned about the cultural and not the cultural differences, and not the word I'm looking for. It's almost it is. It's a team culture as well, right? Because I've definitely worked at places before that haven't had trust in the organization because there's been a repeated, and I won't name these organizations because that's not what I'm here to do, but there's been a repeated lack of trust and a lack of belief with certain sales individuals time and time again doing the wrong thing, which might be their individual's mistake, it might be the business's mistake, but
Right.
the trust level of that organization is naturally, like you said, in a deficit that you were mentioning with your sort of trust capital. And they've kind of got a bit of a bad reputation about that. It does happen. That does happen. So it tends to be, we're going to need to look at this trust framework, not just from an individual perspective, but an actual team cultural. This is our new shift. This is our new dynamic.
Yeah, that's fair.
To kind of finish off. So,
yeah, that's fair. That's very fair.
Mm.
Work in
All right.
progress, actually. So now
Work in progress.
I really appreciate this opportunity because it's given me an opportunity to kind of reflect on trust, becoming a trusted advisor. I think that's becoming so much more important in a generative AI world and an accelerated generative AI world. So I'm kind of very open to perspectives and feedback, etc. So thank you. It's a good insight.
Got to differentiate. There's got to be ways to differentiate. Everyone does AI. Everybody does AI. AI is everywhere. And it's going to become even more important to differentiate. And I think having that human to human connection, underlying trustworthy connection, is definitely going to be one of the core differentiators. So you're definitely onto something. But no, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining. It is very much appreciated. This is the first podcast of Enablement Uncanned, so it's great to have you here. And I'm gonna go out on a whim here and say that my marketing team are going to put some flashy things up on the screen to tell you that they need to connect with you on LinkedIn. So please search and for Arup Chakravarti on LinkedIn, and visit his website latosensu.uk. Just to get in some insights that Arup's doing on this trusted advisor framework. But yeah, thanks again for everyone for listening. Thank you, Arup, and until next time, this has been Enablement Uncanned.